This is the 2023 Nissan Ariya, and it's a new fully electric crossover from Nissan that's surprisingly interesting. The Ariya is sized and priced to compete with other new EV crossovers like the Tesla Model Y, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, the Kia EV6, and the Hyundai Ioniq 5. And today, I'm going to review the Ariya and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this North American spec Land Rover Defender. I love these, sold for $66,500. This wonderful Lotus Evora brought just under $50,000. And this 996 Porsche 911 Cabriolet sold for $38,000 with incredibly low mileage. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions, great selection, and free listings, check it out, carsandbids.com. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the Ariya, which is actually more quirky than you might expect for a compact mid-sized crossover, and we'll start on the inside. When you get in, you see the shifter, which is this. Doesn't really look like most shifters, and it operates kind of strangely too. You're going to press this button on the side and then pull it back for drive. If you want reverse, press the button and push it forward, and then park is this center button on top of the shifter. Kind of strange, like a few things in this interior. For instance, the shifter is mounted on this center console. That's not all that unusual, but this is, the center console can move. You push these arrow buttons and you can move it automatically forward quite far. As you can see, it goes really, really far forward, or more importantly, you can move it back, and then it goes really, really far back. In fact, it goes so far back that, as you can see, the rear passengers can have access to it and can stick stuff on it if they want to. Nissan calls this a movable coffee table, in the sense that it could be used as a coffee table by front or rear passengers, and they said that inspiration for the Ariya's interior came not just from vehicles, but from homes and living spaces, and I'm sure that's where they figured out the idea of the movable coffee table. Now, the center console / movable coffee table has a few normal things. For instance, lift up this lid and there's your wireless phone charger, which has become pretty standard in modern cars, or pull back this lid and there's your cup holders. Again, pretty standard thing, but not so typical. These controls here, these are buttons, even though they're, well, not. They're capacitive touch pads that operate like buttons. The one over on the right adjusts your drive mode. You push it up, down, and then it changes the drive mode. As you can see in the gauge cluster screen, it's changing. That's how you do that. The one that says P Auto with a steering wheel turns on auto parking. This will auto parallel park or perpendicular park if the right conditions are met, and you can turn that on here. Then you have a button marked E step. You press that to turn on one pedal driving, which is fairly common in electric cars. But maybe the most interesting of these capacitive touch buttons is below all this, open and close. Is that the sunroof, the glove box? No. It's a hidden panel in this car. Push open and a trim piece in the lower dashboard reveals itself automatically, comes out from the bottom of the dashboard where it had been hidden. You thought it was just dashboard. Well, actually, it's a panel that extends out. You lift up the lid to this panel and you have a hidden storage area here where you can stick stuff if you want nobody else to find it, because trust me, they won't. This is totally out of the realm of something that someone might think is down there. Now, you can also close the lid to this, and then you have sort of a center console table if you want to stick something there. And if you want it all closed up and hidden, you just press the close button here in the center console, and then it automatically back up into the dashboard, and you would never know it's there. Now, this extra hidden storage panel is in addition to a glove box, which this car still has. You push this button, glove box opens, all pretty standard stuff, except that it's next to a bizarre hidden panel. And by the way, one interesting characteristic of that hidden panel, you can see on the lid a little Easter egg, a flower petal over in the corner with a couple of leaves coming off, I guess to signify that this car is environmentally friendly. You have the same thing on the charge pad in the center console, as you can see, a little flower petal and leaves. Just a little reminder of this car's earth-saving EV-ness when you happen to catch a glance. But anyway, onto other quirks and features of the Ariya. Another big one, the climate controls in the center aren't buttons either. They're capacitive touch pads, just like those controls in the center console. You can adjust temperature here, fan speed, all your usual climate control stuff, but not with buttons, instead these pads. Frankly, I kind of like it. I think it looks awesome that these are just finished right into the wood trim in the car. I think that's cool, and frankly, they're no harder or easier to use than standard buttons, but they definitely look cooler. Now, there are a few typical buttons in this car. One of them is the power button to turn on and off the car, as you can see. Another one is right in the center, and that's your stereo button to turn it on or off, and the dial going around it changes the volume. And then flanking that button, you have the hazard lights over on the left, and on the right you have the next track, previous track button, and the operation of this is very strange. It's up or down. When you think of this functionality, you think left or right. Next track to the right, previous track to the left, but here the button works up or down. It's just something you kind of have to get used to, a little bit quirky. And speaking of quirky, some other quirks in here. For one thing, mood lighting. You can see on the door panel this like low light LED, and it's hidden behind a design. Nissan says that design is intended to evoke Japanese lanterns from hundreds or thousands of years ago. They've incorporated sort of a similar look into this car on the door panel, and also below the dashboard by where your feet are, some mood lighting with this interesting Japanese lantern look. One other thing I really like in this interior, the rear view mirror. You can see right now it's a mirror, but if you flip the switch at the bottom, it becomes a camera. This is becoming more and more popular in new cars, and Nissan has added it now as well. I hope it makes its way into all Nissan models. This mirror camera isn't quite as good, as high quality, or as large as some rivals, but it's great to see it, and it's a lot better than a traditional mirror. And speaking of screens in this car, time to talk about the screens that dominate the dashboard. You can see a large curved panel holds two big screens here, a gauge screen and of course a center screen. There's some pros and cons with this center screen, Nissan's infotainment system. It's relatively easy and intuitive to use. A group of controls over on the left bring you to various screens with just a quick tap, but I've noticed the screen is a little bit slow to respond, slower than rivals, as you can see. It doesn't quite respond perfectly. There's a little bit of lag, and that's a little bit of a drawback, especially when you're used to dealing with screen smartphones and their immediate responsiveness. I'm also not thrilled that heated seats are integrated into the screen. As you can see, you got to tap the bottom left corner of the screen and it pulls up the heated seat menu. Same with heated steering wheel, although it is worth pointing out you could just leave these things in auto. They have an auto setting, which is unusual, and then if the car detects that it's cold and you want to be warmed up, it'll automatically turn on the heated seats, so maybe you don't have to use it all that often. A couple things I really like about this screen setup. For one thing, the home screen, which shows several different things at once. Your music in the corner, your phone in another corner, and then the map all displayed on the same screen for you to see, so you don't have to cycle through different screens to see this important stuff. Some cars make you do that. I also really like that the camera system is easily accessible in this car. You tap this thing that says camera and it pulls right up. This is really useful if you're parking, trying to get into a tight spot. You don't want to have to go into menus to find the camera system. You just want it to show up. And so having it there with a quick tap is a really cool idea. But next up, moving on to the gauge cluster screen. Again, I find this to be pretty excellent. High quality, high resolution, full color, a lot to like here, and I like how configurable it is. You can have the center panel show a wide variety of different things, basically whatever you want to see. Now, one drawback to the gauge cluster screen is that center panel can only show one thing. So for instance, you get the map in there, you can't also see your stereo info and vice versa. The panel over on the left is configurable, but minimally. You can't do all that much with it, so you're basically using that center panel and you kind of got to pick what one thing you want to see. And by the way, speaking of that panel on the left being configurable, one of your options is to show you your brake lights. If for some reason you want to see that, it shows, and then when you tap the brakes, it shows the brake lights on in real time. Very weird, but that's what they did. A couple of interesting things with this screen. For one, you can configure it to play a welcome sound. So when you get into the car and start it, it plays a sound. Take a listen. And And speaking of unusual sounds, check this out. If you're driving along and not looking forward, you can configure the car to alert you and remind you to look. Right now I'm testing this, driving forward, not looking, see what happens. That is interesting. Never seen that before. And speaking of not looking where you're going and relying on the car, the Ariya has excellent driver assist technology, meaning you're on the freeway or certain roads, you can basically let the car do the steering, the braking, the accelerating, and just kind of sit there. As long as you're paying attention, looking forward, the car will see that and kind of do a lot of that stuff for you. It works well, great system, more cars integrating this, nice to see it here. And next up we move on to the back seat in the Ariya, which is actually surprisingly large. I got knee room, I got leg room, I got headroom, which isn't all that common in a compact crossover, and that's where the Ariya fits in terms of overall sizing, about the size of a Nissan Rogue, but you got a lot more space in here. You also have more space in here, I think, than the Ford Mustang Mach-E and the Tesla Model Y, although maybe not quite as much as a Hyundai Ioniq 5, but still good rear seat room back here, more than a typical compact crossover, although fairly typical of electric vehicles. That's because of the packaging of EVs. You don't have a big engine up front which kind of compresses everything. Instead, you can stick more stuff in the engine compartment and move the wheelbase out, which gives the passenger compartment more space, so you got a roomier interior here. Now, it's worth pointing out that's exactly what they did in this vehicle, and the result is you don't have an extra front storage compartment like you do in some EVs. Nissan said they stuck a lot of things under there, including like the AC system in this car. It's all in front where the engine would have been. The trade-off is no front compartment, but the benefit is more interior space, and most people would rather have interior space than a front trunk. But anyway, rear seat stuff, not all that much unusual going on back here. You do have heated rear seats, which is a nice luxury to have, and a couple of USB ports, both A and C next to each other, also nice to have. It's worth pointing out the rear seat isn't quite as nice as it is up front. For instance, the door panel, you can see that Japanese lantern texture, but you don't actually have lighting behind it. That cool mood lighting you had up front, they didn't bother to spend the money to carry that on to the back. And next up, moving around to the back of this Ariya Premier, and I guess mentioning that, I should cover pricing, horsepower levels, range, and trim levels, all of which are really confusing. There's a wide array of power outputs, range outputs, and 6 different trim levels, and they all sort of intermingle. The 6 trim levels are Venture, Engage, Empower, Evolve, Premier, and Platinum. I'm not really sure what order they fit in, but here's the basic gist for this car. Front-wheel drive models are available very soon, within the next month or two. All-wheel drive will be coming this spring, they say, spring of 23. If you get a front-wheel drive model, the base version starts at around $44,000 with 215 horsepower and about 215 miles of range. Front-wheel drive models can go up into the low $50,000 range, and they max out around 305 miles of range and about 240 horsepower. Now, if you want all-wheel drive, again, not available yet, but maybe 3-6 months, that's gonna start around $48,000 with 335 horsepower and only about 205 miles of range. But you can add more power and range. There's gonna be a version with 389 horsepower, which is serious performance vehicle territory. Obviously a lot more money. It starts to get into the high 50s and low $60,000 range at that point. As for charging, Nissan says this is fast charge capable, although not quite as fast as some of its rivals. Nissan says 20% to 80% of range can be added in about 40 minutes, which is pretty good, but again, not quite as fast as some of the others like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and Kia EV6. But anyway, next up, since I'm outside the Ariya, let's talk design and styling, starting in back where you have a bar going across the entire rear of the car. This bar is sort of blacked out unless the headlights are on, then you can see it is a light bar, kind of a cool look, doesn't just sit there red. You get that smoke taillight look in your Ariya. Actually, I joke about that, but the truth is this is a pretty nice looking vehicle and it's distinctive, which I love. So many modern crossovers look pretty similar, but this has a different flair. It's gonna be distinctive, obvious on the road. You're not looking at one of the many bland crossovers. It has kind of a cool and special look, and I think it looks more premium and luxurious than it is. And it also doesn't just parrot all the other electric vehicles with the boring teardrop shape. It injects a little bit more personality and interestingness into the design. I think this looks good. By the way, one other thing worth pointing out on the outside, the charge port door is up front, the front fender area, and you press on it and it opens, which usually isn't something I would highlight, but so many automakers do weird things with their charge port doors, like you tap and it automatically pops out and lowers itself or whatever. It's kind of refreshing to see one where you just push and it opens. It's simple, it won't break, and it's easy. But anyway, next up we move back inside the car and into the cargo area, which is surprisingly large for a compact crossover. As you can see, you got good cargo space back here, and if you want more space, you can lift up the floor. This panel lifts up for more space below, and the rear panel also lifts up for more space below, or you can just remove them entirely if you want more depth in the cargo area for more space in back. And of course, you can also fold down the seats back here, although you can't fold them down from the cargo area. There's no button or latch back here. Instead, you have to go around to the individual seats themselves, pull on it, and then the seats fold down for more cargo room. And finally, moving up front, nothing particularly interesting up here, although the front end design does generally mimic the front end look of other Nissan models, even the gas-powered ones, although here the corporate grille has been replaced with a corporate, well, panel that looks like a grille, because electric vehicles don't need grills, but still, they've made it look relatively similar to their vehicles that have grills. Now, on the panel that looks like a grille, you can see this sort of design imprinted and kind of fading into the center. That's supposed to tie the exterior of the car in with that Japanese lantern look on the door panels that I showed you earlier. You can see it here on the outside. All right, driving the new Nissan Ariya. And it's fine. You know, one of the interesting things about this car, and I think about electric vehicles in general, is that they're not as distinguished like gas-powered cars were by their power plants. You know, gas-powered cars had different types of engines that made them feel different. Electric cars all feel about the same. And so to distinguish them, automakers are doing weird things, like these capacitive touch buttons, like the movable coffee table, like that weird panel that slides out from under the dashboard. And just design in general is kind of getting cool and unusual and kind of weird and quirky. But the actual driving experiences aren't really all that different, because electric vehicles just don't have that many differentiation points on the road. And the reason I mention this is this doesn't drive that differently from Ioniq 5, EV6, etc., etc. It just feels like an electric crossover. Now, it does feel a little taller than Ioniq 5 and EV6, which gives you a kind of a better vantage point on the road, and that's nice. But as for everything else, there's not all that much difference. Now, this particular version of the Ariya is at like 240 horsepower, give or take, front-wheel drive. It's not fast. The Ioniq 5 feels a little quicker. But again, this is all kind of like software and like number of motors. It doesn't have like, it's not like there's differences in engine responsiveness and things like that. They're all electric. And so this car drives pretty much like I expected it to, in the sense that it's a compact electric crossover. Doesn't make a lot of noise. Accelerates, it's on the slower side, but you know, it's just as linear as every other electric vehicle. Road noise and wind noise, fine, not amazing. It's not incredibly quiet in here, but it's not intended to be. This isn't some crazy luxury car. It feels nice, you can hear a little bit, but it's not so bad. Steering and handling, you know, uninspired is how I would put it. I mean, it drives fine, it steers okay, but it doesn't, it's not amazing. It's not a sports car by any stretch of the imagination. It's a mid-size compact Nissan crossover. I mean, that's what it is. And it drives like that. In terms of visibility, pretty good. It's kind of a pinch point in back, so you wouldn't expect it to be great, but you can see very well back there. You got the mirrors, a camera, you got big side view mirrors, you can see reasonably well around you. Predictable, simple, rational. There's nothing, you know, again, the driving experience is nothing really to write home. These cars are distinguished by the way they look, the weird features they have, their technology. And this car does have some distinctive things in those respects, but the drive is fine. Now, I am curious to drive the all-wheel drive version with 390 horsepower, or whatever that is, but it's coming soon. It's not here yet, and it's probably a few months away, and I suspect that nobody's really gonna buy that version anyway. This one is more in line with what people are actually gonna buy. And given that, I think it is probably the right one to drive, and it drives fine. It's a nice, acceptable vehicle that has a couple of cool quirks that I think help distinguish it and make it kind of cool, and a nice design. And so that's the new 2023 Nissan Ariya, an interesting, fully electric crossover that's bringing Nissan into the electric SUV world. And now it's time to give the new Ariya a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 58 out of 100, which places the Nissan Ariya here against some similar electric crossovers, but this low score is misleading. I say that because the Ariya I drove was a lower power version, since that's what Nissan is releasing first, but that means this isn't an equal comparison to rivals, since I drove higher power versions of other models, and you can see the result in the Ariya's low acceleration score, which affected its total Doug score. Point being, this is a bit of an apples to oranges comparison. But you can see the Ariya's daily score is just as good as everything else on this list, suggesting it stacks up well against electric crossover rivals in daily use. I'm excited to drive a more powerful Ariya when the time comes, and I think it's a good rival to today's most popular electric crossovers.